I almost threw away my entire life on Christian missions. Let's get into it. My name is Brian. I am a ex-Christian. I deconverted after over 25 years in the church, incredibly passionate about Christianity, to the point where I almost wasted my entire life becoming a Christian missionary. Let's go into a little bit of the history. So really from my early teens, and maybe even before that, I had an interest in missions, in service. It just captured my imagination. A lot of it early on was a mix of, my desire for adventure. Missions is often very glamorized, very, very exciting. And it also had something to do with me wanting to fit in, me wanting to prove myself in the church, as well as a constantly developing passion to help people, and I believed that that was an amazing way to do it. Events like 30-hour famines, which are basically where your youth group all is in a church for 30 hours without food, learns about extreme poverty, learns about other social justice issues. One of these is where I was exposed to information about human trafficking. That was a huge influence in my early interest in missions as well. Certainly seeing older kids go on mission trips that I wasn't allowed to go on because I was like 11 or 12 was a definite influence. I still remember the older kids in the youth group, like the high schoolers, went to Venezuela for a mission trip, and I really, really, really wanted to go. And because obviously it's an international trip, there's a whole lot going on, a lot of liability. You don't want like a young, just turning teenager to go. And so, I wasn't allowed to go. And I was so freaking frustrated about that. In 7th grade though, I did get a chance to go on my first mission trip. It was a much more localized mission trip to migrant farm workers in the Skagit County, Washington region. A lot of them would come up from Oaxaca, Mexico, work, then go down to California, then back up. Very poor community. So we had the opportunity to minister to them for a week. For me, it was a very, very powerful, very, very formative experience. And I just caught the mission bug even more. Like I was just hyped for missions. I thought, I was seeing God work, seeing all kinds of crazy stuff. I loved working with the kids. And I just thought that it was an absolute blast. And the next year I went to Reynosa, Mexico with the youth group. We did a lot of different interesting ministries. This was a very, very different trip. We weren't like localized into one specific group of kids building relationships. We were like moving around to different areas, doing the more typical like youth group mission trip kind of stuff, like street dramas, puppet shows, street evangelism, all this kind of stuff that wasn't necessarily what I might call like the most productive as far as like actually reaching people for Christ, but it was a very, very powerful, interesting experience for me. And I loved it. The next year I ended up doing another migrant mission trip to a different camp, but in that same area. That ended up turning into long-term ministry. One of the absolute best things that ever happened to me in my Christian journey. And I'll definitely make another video detailing more of that. Later on, ended up going to Jackson, Mississippi, to the inner city, doing ministry with some of the teenagers there. That was a really interesting, different kind of trip. It wasn't one that I absolutely fell in love with as much, but I was just so passionate about missions that I didn't care that it maybe wasn't the absolute best trip of my life, and I didn't personally get a ton out of it because it was like, service is amazing, Jesus is working, it's awesome. And then in my senior year of high school, I actually ended up doing 2 different short-term mission trips. I went to the Philippines and then to Nicaragua. And one was with my church youth group, and one was actually with some people from my school. And they were 2 very, very different mission trips. The one to the Philippines was much more that street evangelism, going to orphanages, doing dramas for kids, playing with kids, working with a deaf academy on Bohol Island. A lot of different stuff going on, but it was sort of maybe that quintessential foreign mission trip where there was just so much going on, so much emotion. I loved that trip. And the trip to Nicaragua, similarly, I absolutely adored. It was a very, very different trip because it was a mix of Christians as well as secular people going on the trip. Our main purpose was to do a little education course for the kids at a place called the Rio Christian Academy, and we also took some time just to like see Nicaragua, and it was very, very cool. I actually on that trip was potentially going to go down to Nicaragua for several months after, but life and circumstances just kind of fell apart for that. But I was really, really thinking about right out of high school going down to Nicaragua and serving for a few months. So that was pretty interesting. But I loved both those trips, and they just reignited that passion in me once again for service, for missions. It was really the part of my Christian journey where I always felt connected to God. I always, through service, through missions, through evangelism, through just hanging out with kids who, didn't have parents, or their parents were really busy, and I could just like support them and hang out with them. Like I always felt what I thought was the presence of God. And then I ended up, this was all when I lived in Washington State, and then I ended up moving to just outside of St. Louis, and that's kind of where things took a little bit of a negative shift for me, actually. There was not near as much missions opportunities. Really, the only missions opportunities I could find was this ministry called Streetlights that went into East St. Louis through kind of a fairly big mega church in that area, and just we kind of went door to door talking to the people, and if the opportunity came up, sharing the gospel. For me, I didn't connect with this as much. I'm not a super gregarious, outgoing person in that kind of context, so I don't enjoy, going door to door, talking to random people. I tried to do the ministry. I really was wanting to get into that. I really was trying to find that missions base for me because I had been so passionate about the migrant culture especially, and just had, a very, very strong affinity with the Hispanic culture and just really enjoyed it, was learning Spanish. And then I was kind of thrown into this, trying to understand the inner city and what the situation was there, and especially from kind of a very blinders on Christian perspective. Like my passion for missions kind of teetered a little bit, kind of from 2012 to 2013. In 2013, I moved to Kansas City and got plugged in with a church that's now called Life Mission Church. Back then it was called Life Church. And, started to kind of find that passion again. Worship and everything was much more emotional, and so I kind of was starting to get back into that kind of thing. And then they were doing a course on missions called Perspectives. So Perspectives is basically a 15-session course that really, it hits on all kinds of different aspects of missions. Basically, the organization's goal is to equip Christians to preach to every tribe, every nation, so that Jesus can come back. Like, that's basically what they do. At the time, this course was huge for me. It really got me excited about missions. There were different speakers every week who were missionaries or ran missions organizations or different things like that. I actually found my old notebook that I took all the notes from the class in, and it's been really fascinating to go back and look through it because I was just so sold out. I was literally ready to give up everything, go be a missionary. It felt like, okay, this is my purpose, this is my life. I am so excited about this vision. And there was one particular speaker that really kind of captured my imagination in a way. Jamie Zumwalt, who does a lot of missions work, is one of the people who runs Beautiful Feet Boot Camp, which I was actually really, really considering going to. It's basically it sounds like it's a boot camp for people who want to become missionaries to get them ready, get the knowledge, get them trained up, get them, you know, just really aware of what the mission field is going to look like. And I was just so impressed with her speaking and was like, I think I'm interested in this. I bought her book called A Simple Obsession about, you know, getting really close to Jesus, and really, really enjoyed that. And so I was literally at the point by the end of Perspectives where I was like counting the cost, like in Luke 14:26 and the surrounding verses, you know, where Jesus is saying, hey, you got to count the cost and follow me. And, you know, I was at the point where, you know, in verse 26, Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yet even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And I was at that point where I was like looking at this and I'm like, I've got to like let go of all these things. If I don't hate them compared to Christ, if I don't love Christ more than all these things, all these people, I've got to get to that point where I love him more than any of these things. I give up everything. Jamie was talking about in her session of this course, that you've got to be ready to basically give up everything, your financial freedom, your choice of family, your choice of even if you're gonna live or die, just like your choice of what you're gonna eat, where you live, like everything. Like literally you're giving up your autonomy to Jesus, and he's gonna use that and move. And like I was really into, like, even now talking about it, you might hear, like, I don't know, it excited me, and I can kind of still feel in some ways that excitement, like I'm back in my brain emotionally at that point. Now, intellectually now, that's absolutely insane to throw away everything, throw away your dreams, throw away your life basically to follow a book that's 2,000 to 4,000 or 5,000 years old, depending on what book within the book is written. But I really felt that. And part of me does miss a little bit of that because it felt, life had such a sure purpose. I remember I was very, very influenced by Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, all of those guys who, if you've seen the movie End of the Spear, all those missionaries who went down to Ecuador, got themselves killed, and then their families went and essentially like spread the gospel to this really remote tribe. And like that was very, very inspiring, the idea of dying for Jesus or going into that kind of scenario was very, very exciting and appealing to me. And my sister several years later told me, hey, Brian, I'm really glad you didn't go down that route because I was kind of worried about you. I thought you were kind of crazy. But, that's where I was at. That was how committed I was to missions. So what exactly happened that got me from that point to the point now where I have completely rejected Christianity? It's a little bit of a long, convoluted story, but you can definitely check it out in my video about deconversion. I may also try and go into it in a little bit more detail in another video, but this video is already getting kind of long, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this wrapped up. But make sure that you subscribe, because in my next video, I'm going to talk about my view on short-term missions as an ex-Christian who went on a lot of mission trips. So make sure that you're here for that, and I will catch you in the next video.